tell me why you want this job, and when did you first think about wanting the job? I don't care whether it was over a tequila shot or when you were in your crib. When did you decide, you turned to your wife and said, you know what, I'm going to do this?
Yeah. I want this job because the future of Maryland is personal to me. I'm a third generation Marylander. This is where I was born. This is where I came of age. It's where I fell in love and where my wife and I are raising our kids. And I know right now we are just a state that has a lot to be proud of, but we're just leaving a lot of people behind in this process. And I learned this whole idea, this mantra of leave no one behind when I was in the military. I first joined the military when I was 17 years old, and they taught us this in our first days: leave no one behind. And that needs to be the new mission for the state of Maryland. And I think the moment when I started realizing that I wanted to go for this role as governor was I've been working on these issues for a long period of time. I've been involved in public service, whether it was leading soldiers in combat, whether it was running a small business in Maryland, helping first-generation students, helping them to make it go both to and through college, or whether it was running one of the largest poverty-fighting organizations in this country. And you realize that if we are not fixing the systems, and if we're not moving in partnership to fix the systems, the same way where I worked with members of the legislature on the blueprint and on fair appraisal value in historically redlined neighborhoods, or working with the private sector and the nonprofit sector, if we're not working in a coordinated fashion to be able to address these issues, we'll just find ourselves continuing to clean up the debris that comes from broken issues. That's what I've done for my whole career. And so I knew that as the state is making a decision about its future, it was important that we as a state lead with that kind of fashion, that kind of direction.
You know, us Baltimoreans, we are colloquial,
yes,
and we want to know what high school you went to, and that all determines whether we talk to you and shut you down or invite you to a bull roast on a Friday night. So how do you make the connection? Hey, I'm one of you.
Yeah. I'm a very proud Baltimorean, and I know that I wasn't born here. It was opportunity. It was a combination of opportunity and tragedy that brought me to my landing point in Baltimore, where I was born down in Tacoma Park. But when I was almost 4 years old, my father died in front of me because he didn't get the health care that he needed. And my mother struggled. And so she moved us up to go live with my grandparents up in the Bronx. My grandfather was a minister in the South Bronx. My grandmother was a school teacher in the South Bronx for close to 40 years. And while I moved around a lot when I was a child, was in the Bronx, went to Pennsylvania because I got sent to military school because of some issues that I got involved in. It wasn't until I was 14 years old that my mom got her first job that gave her benefits. First job that allowed her to work one job instead of multiple jobs. That was a job at the Annie E. Casey Foundation in Baltimore. That job didn't just change her life. It changed all of our lives. And what it did was, for the first time in my life, I found a place that accepted me for who I was. I found a place that I could finally call home. And so that was the point that I fell in love with the city of Baltimore. As my mom said, I couldn't keep him out of Baltimore when we first moved down here. And from that point on, I've always called Baltimore home. We're proudly raising our kids here in Baltimore right now. I started my business in Baltimore. We started making investments with the largest poverty-fighting organization in this country. The first time when I became the CEO, one of the first things we did was start making investments in Baltimore. This is my home, and I take the future of Baltimore very seriously, because I also know you can't have a thriving Maryland if you do not have a thriving Baltimore.
Rashawn wanted to move the State House to Baltimore. Yeah. Would you do that?
Well, I'm proud of the fact that we are about to have a Baltimorean as the governor, right? If you think about the history of Baltimore, and you take a look at a longitudinal, data set for Baltimore, if you look at some of the eras when Baltimore has really been thriving and moving forward and addressing issues from everything from economic growth and public safety, what's important to note isn't just who was the mayor. What's really important to note is look back at those eras and ask the question, who was the governor? Because some of the best times that we had for Baltimore wasn't necessarily when William Donald Schaefer was the mayor. It's when he went to Annapolis. It's the same thing with Martin O'Malley. The last time we had under 200 homicides in the city of Baltimore actually wasn't when Martin O'Malley was in City Hall. It was when he was in Annapolis. who the governor is matters to the Baltimore region. And I'm proud of the fact that if we're successful in January, Maryland's governor is going to be a Baltimorean.
How are you going to work with the mayor?
I'm going to work closely with the mayor, as I'll work closely with all of our other chief executives around the state. I understand that the way we're going to make progress is partnership. And what we need right now is a chief executive in the second floor in Annapolis. We need a governor who, when we talk about Baltimore, doesn't say it with disdain. We understand that so many of the issues that we've got to address, from fixing public safety and making sure that people have a right, children have a right not to be afraid of their own communities. Right? That we can have a 21st century education system that's actually preparing our children for the jobs of now and for the jobs of tomorrow. The fact that we should have transportation assets that move people from where they live to where they work, that's not going to be done by a person or a silo. It's going to be done in partnership. And so I'm really looking forward to having a strong relationship with City Hall, with the City Council, with the private sector, with the nonprofit sector, with the philanthropic sector to make those changes happen.
Your military background, as a military man, you know as well as anybody, there's a way for a solution to a problem, or you fix the problem. There's no in between.
There you go.
So what's the first problem you're going to fix?
Well, in the military, there's a statement, mission first, people always. And I think that's exactly how we're focusing on our work. Mission first, people always. We know that you can't get anything done if you're not first addressing the issue of public safety. If people do not feel safe, they will not come. And if people don't feel safe, they will not stay. We've got to address the issue of public safety, and that means getting and keeping violent offenders off of our streets, getting these illegal guns out of our communities, being able to fix a broken parole and probation system, because right now, a third of all violent crime is being done by people who are in violation of parole and probation, i.e. we know who they are, and they continue to commit violent crimes in our neighborhoods. That's a specific function that the state has and should be taking leadership roles on. Taking state resources and putting them on loan to the city of Baltimore. Things like assisting our homicide detectives in the city of Baltimore. Right now, Baltimore has a 41% closure rate for homicides. So basically, if I commit a homicide in Baltimore, I've got a better chance of getting away with it than I do of getting captured, caught, tried, and convicted. These are all things that the state can uniquely do to help support, starting with public safety, but knowing that we're not going to arrest our way out of the challenge either. Everything else about economic development, educational supports, transportation, affordable housing, that's all things that have to be part of a larger plan.
Let me ask you this. Did you ever think about a curfew?
I think what we're talking about there is tactics, right? We have to remember what exactly is the situation that we're dealing with. And what we're dealing with is we have a situation where we have our youth, for so many of our youth, who are growing up in a deep and a dire state of poverty with a lack of opportunities. And so we have to be able to look at all resources and tools and strategies and tactics that we have to bear to figure out how do we go about addressing the challenge. We have to make sure that our kids are not out. Out in the middle of the night. We have to make sure that our kids are not on corners. We have to make sure we're doing that. But we also have to think about what are the alternatives that we're then setting up for them as well. And those are all things that we have to do in partnership with the local jurisdictions, with city government.
I got ADHD, I remember that. Now, here's the thing that people want to know.
Yeah.
The casinos raise billions and billions of dollars, supposedly going to the schools, but we still have 14 Baltimore City schools that don't have air conditioning. How is that possible?
The fact that our city right now has and our state has some of the best schools in the country, and we have schools that have to get let out at noon when it's 90 degrees is unconscionable. The fact that we have some of the best schools in the country in the state of Maryland, and we have students who cannot drink from the water fountains because of lead, it's unconscionable. And so there's a few things that we have to remember in all this. Making sure that we are having proper funding for 21st century schools, because we're sending a message every single day our students walk into a classroom, every single day our educators walk into their place of employment. We send a message about what we expect from them without us even saying a word, just by the buildings that they're walking into. We also know that we can't stop there. That the expectations that we're setting for our children and how we're thinking about an entire ecosystem of support is going to matter to not just them and their families, but that is going to matter to all of us. This was what we mean when we say that in our administration, we are going to have a leave no one behind agenda. The leave no one behind agenda means that we are only going to be as great as how we are treating our most vulnerable and making sure that basic supports and supplies that our children are going to need to compete, that we have those things in place. And it's not just going to be about funding. It's about leadership, and it's about direction, and it's about accountability.
We lack Fortune 500 companies in Baltimore. Yeah. You're coming from the corporate world. You got to bring the corporations, got to bring the company, you got to bring the jobs in. How are you going to do that?
Well, we are, and we have to both support our small businesses and our micro businesses, which is really that's the economic engine for the state of Maryland. It's our small businesses, it's our micro businesses. We have to create an entrepreneurship culture in here, right? We have to have students that are learning how not just to be employees, but how to be employers. We need to make this the best place for our entrepreneurs to grow and thrive. And we have to go recruit these businesses and be able to leverage the assets that we have in the state of Maryland. The fact that the state of Maryland has the Port of Baltimore and some of the largest biotech agencies, cyber tech, agri-health platforms, but we're not leveraging them. And I want to be clear, I want the other governors to like me, I guess, but I need the other governors to understand this. Every time I go to one of their states, I'm bringing 3 businesses with me. We are going to make Maryland the place where innovation grows, where entrepreneurship lives, where people can come and grow and want to retire. That is the economic engine that our state deserves. And frankly, with my background as being a business leader, my background of working with people in the private sector is something that I'm excited to bring to bear into Annapolis.
And you know people who retire in Maryland, they move to Florida, move to Delaware. How are you going to keep them here?
Well, and you think about the fact that Maryland was rated by national publications as the worst place in America to retire. The worst. And so we've got to be able to address issues like making Maryland more affordable. We've got to make this a place where our older adults have a chance to age in place and age with dignity. We have to be able to address how the tax code is working and frankly how it's very difficult for people to be able to stay here, particularly when you're looking in concert with our neighboring states, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Virginia. But we also have to answer the other things that people are looking for when it comes to where they want to retire. That taxation rates is an important component, but they're also asking questions like, tell me about public safety. Tell me about public transportation. Will I have an affordable place to live? Tell me about the schools for my kids and my grandkids. If we can't answer those questions correctly, I don't care what tax rate you offer somebody. They're going to move. We've got to make this the place, we've got to make this the ecosystem that people want to come and grow and thrive and retire.
2 points here. Sparrows Point, which lost Beth Steele. Well, look what they've done. Trade Point Atlantic. I mean, that is incredible. Yeah. But then you have Cumberland, which lost Kelly Springfield. They haven't been right since. They're suffering an opioid crisis like we don't. It's a secret opioid out there.
It's not even a secret.
Yeah. How do you give them some life out there?
Yeah. It's intentionality. If you think about the state of Maryland, where we have the Port of Baltimore, the Chesapeake Bay, 4 of the top HBCUs in America, the top research institutions on the globe. We have over 50 military installations here. This is the home of the NSA and the CDC and the NIH, and I say every acronym in the world exists in the state of Maryland. The challenge for what we have right now is we are asset rich and we are strategy poor. Where we have all the greatest assets in the world, I'll put our assets against anyone else in this country, but we don't have a strategy to leverage them. And if you come up with ways, and we will come up with ways, of being able to utilize every facet of our society, the private sector, the nonprofit sector, philanthropy, to go out and take this state on an 8-year roadshow, to go sell the beauty of the Western Mountains and the kind of economic development that could take place in the Western Mountains when it comes to manufacturing support and the way they have a growing and a thriving hemp industry, to what's taking place on the Eastern Shore for our watermen and our farmers out there in the Eastern Shore, or what's taking place down in southern Maryland and Prince George's County, Montgomery County, where Prince George's County is about to become the capital of quantum. The global capital of quantum is in Prince George's County, or the fact that you do have solar and wind technology, electrification of the grid. We have all the assets, but we need to have a plan and a roadmap, and that's exactly what our administration is going to offer.
A political name that you told you were going to run for governor, or somebody that's given you advice that it stuck with you. Who was that person that we could all? Oh yeah.
Well, I tell you, one of the most important experiences of my life happened when I was a teenager. And I had an internship with somebody. His name was Mayor Schmoke. And Mayor Schmoke didn't just teach me the intricacies of municipal government. And frankly, I fell in love with the nuts and bolts of municipal government. Like, I enjoy rolling my sleeves up. I'm a policy wonk by nature. And I got that from my experience in working with Mayor Schmoke. He was the first person that told me about the Rhodes Scholarship. In fact, I have a picture that sits on my desk of him pointing towards a picture on the wall during the last day of my internship. That picture he's pointing towards is a picture of his Rhodes class. And that was the conversation where he was telling me that he wanted me to apply to become a Rhodes Scholar. And I became the first black Rhodes Scholar in the history of Johns Hopkins University. And I remember having the first conversations with him about running for governor. And as always, he gave me great advice where he said, you are going to have to outwork everybody. And we did. And he said, and nothing's going to be given to you. You were running against a very talented field in a primary, which we were. But he said, if you just stay focused on your why and you make that argument to as many Marylanders as you can, you'll be fine.
You ran up against the Democratic National Chairman, connected. You ran up against others who had held elected office. You're coming from the corporate world, no political experience. How did you do it?
Yeah. This was a remarkably talented field. To your point, I mean, we ran the former head of the DNC, 2 cabinet secretaries, 3 people who would run statewide, the current comptroller. I mean, this was a very talented field. I think the reason that I think we were successful is we offered a new type of vision for our state. I think we went out to the state and we were asking people that as a state, we're ready to go faster. We're ready to go harder. We're ready to compete, and as a state, we're ready to win. And I think the other big thing that we did with our campaign is we went everywhere. We campaigned in all 24 jurisdictions around the state. And we went to a lot of places that people said, hey, listen, there's not a lot of Democrats out there. And I said, yeah, but there's a lot of Marylanders. And I plan on being their governor, too.
First African-American governor, if you win. What's that title mean to you?
It's humbling because I know the history of the state and I know my family's history. I'm the grandson of someone who, it was the Ku Klux Klan that ran him out and ran my family out, not when he was just a toddler, not out of a community, but out of the country where my family picked up and moved to Jamaica. And for much of my family, they said they were not going to come back. This is my mom's side of the family. They said they weren't going to come back to this country. Many of them never did. But my grandfather did. In all of his humility, he said, this country would be incomplete without me. And this is where I was born. And he came back. He went to an HBCU. He became the first black minister in the history of the Dutch Reformed Church. And so when I think about what it means to have the opportunity to be the first black governor of a state that helped to welcome and raise and build up my family, it's very meaningful. But I also know this, I'm not running for governor to make history. I'm running for governor because I want to make child poverty history. I'm running for governor because I will make, and we will make, educational inequity history. I'm running for governor because we will make environmental injustice history. I'm running for governor because we will make the idea that these other states around us will beat us repeatedly and take our businesses. We're going to make that history. And so the history that I'm running on is not personal. The history that I'm running for, it's collective.
Where were you when Barack Obama was elected?
I was at a friend's house. And actually, I was at a friend's house up in New York with a gathering of about 12 folks, a lot of military vets. I actually ended up speaking at the Democratic National Convention right before President Obama, at that time Senator Obama, accepted the nomination to become the Democratic nominee because I was working on military issues and veterans issues, and he asked me to speak at the convention. So it was a remarkable experience, and I think the thing that I remember most was calling my mom right after. And my mom, who was an immigrant from this country, an immigrant from Jamaica, was just in all-out tears about the amazement of what she was witnessing and something that she didn't know that she would ever get a chance to witness. And it's a moment that I won't forget.
Man. Let me ask you this. Hogan won the first time. It's my belief when he decided to lower tolls. It's a simple issue like that if you lower the egg prices in grocery stores, you'll get elected. What is the bread and butter issue out there? You know, the poor aren't the only ones suffering now.
That's right.
I mean, there are a lot of people suffering.
That's right.
They can't afford groceries. They can't afford a house. They can't do the. So what is that one issue that'll strike a nerve?
I think that when I go around the state of Maryland and we hear about the economic insecurity that people are feeling from the eastern shore to the western mountains to Hartford and Cecil County to southern Maryland and everywhere in between, economics is a real challenge. People are saying things are more expensive, and the truth is they are. And we're not watching wages keep up. The economic philosophy that our administration is going to take, and the North Star for our administration, it's going to be work, wages, and wealth. Work, wages, and wealth. And how do you create pathways for work, wages, and wealth for every single family? And that means doing things like having an education system that's preparing people for jobs now and for the jobs of the future. Right now, there's 2 available jobs in the state of Maryland for every single person that's filing for unemployment. And people say, well, how does that make sense? It's because we have a dynamic economy, but we're not training our workers and our students to participate in that economy. That we are going to make sure we're doing things like increasing wages and getting to a $15 minimum wage that's pegged to inflation faster. Because right now we still have far too many people who are working, in some cases multiple jobs, and still living below or at a poverty line. And when it comes to wealth, it means giving people the opportunity to own more than they owe. Creating an ownership society where we can do things like supporting first-time homeowners, supporting our entrepreneurs to be able to have businesses that can grow and that can thrive and know that they have a state that's going to support that. Work, wages, and wealth. We are going to create economic growth in our state and an economic growth that everyone can participate in.
You're not taking this guy for granted.
At all. And we can't. Because let's be clear, my opponent won the Republican nomination. He's the nominee. But I also, when we talk about things like when I say that we have to have Maryland as a state where we are going to protect abortion rights, that abortion is health care, that Maryland should be a safe haven for abortion rights, and he says he would criminalize abortion for both the patient and the provider, even in the case of incest and rape. When even the current governor, Larry Hogan, who's a Republican, when asked would he support the Republican nominee, Larry Hogan's response was, not only am I not going to support him, I wouldn't even give him a tour of the governor's office. This is real, the consequence that we have right now. So we are taking this very, very seriously because what we have in November is not an opponent. It is a threat. Someone who literally said he would have activated the National Guard and put them against the FBI when they conducted a search warrant on the former president. Someone who wants to bring Donald Trump's ideology to Maryland, and he's running on this. So we're taking this race very seriously because this is not just a campaign. This is a core moment for our state to step up and decide, are we going to be a state that leaves no one behind? Or are we going to be a state that is going to be led by divisiveness and conspiracy theories?
Okay, one final question.
Yeah,
okay.
no, it's great.
You're a good-looking guy. You're educated. You're coming from the corporate world. You're about to set out for government. If everything goes according to plan in State Circle, would you take the trip down Pennsylvania Avenue to another house? And don't tell, oh, it's too early. I got to get. Would there be designs for that?
This is going to be Maryland's decade, period. This is going to be the decade where Maryland sprints ahead of these other states, where we are going to be the first state in this country that has a service year option for every single high school graduate. Every high school graduate will have a chance to have a paid year of service to the state of Maryland. That this is going to be a time when we're going to have transportation assets that move people from where they live to where they work, to include, revitalizing the Red Line, which means how are we coming up with core infrastructure, fixing up the American Legion Bridge and fixing up the work that needs to take place down there, but also ensuring that we can have an educational platform that's teaching our students how not just to be employees, but how to be employers. This is going to be Maryland's decade.
All right, would you like to be president one day?
And I can't wait for Maryland to be able to sprint ahead of all these other states. Well, no, because I tell you right now, what I'm really looking forward to is watching all these states continue to look at Maryland from behind. This is our decade. and it's our time to get this right.
That's it. Done.
It's a good try, though.
I tried. I knew you were going to.